Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're going deep into the heart of Pesach, Passover, as it's known in English.
Exactly.
And we've got this amazing collection of texts here, a blend of like religious legal rulings, commentaries, even some of those traditional customs.
The minhagim.
The minhagim, yeah, that we follow. And our goal here really is to distill it all down, for you, the listener, so that whether you're getting ready for your own Seder or maybe just want to be able to talk about Pesach with some real knowledge, you're not going to feel lost in the details.
I think that's so important, because sometimes you look at all the laws and customs and it can get a bit overwhelming.
Totally. And we want to highlight those key insights, those surprising facts, and just bring a lot of clarity without drowning you in information.
It's all about those aha moments.
Exactly. So think of this as your shortcut to Pesach understanding. We'll be drawing from those essential legal texts. Those are kind of like the bedrock of Jewish law, alongside the commentaries that offer these really insightful interpretations and practical guidance.
Like the Mishnah Berurah.
The Mishnah Berurah, that's a big one, right? And of course, we can't forget those age-old customs, those minhagim that have been passed down through generations.
All right, so where should we begin with all this?
Oh, right off the bat, just looking at these sources, one thing that jumps out is the importance of preparation.
Oh, absolutely. It's not a holiday that just sneaks up on you.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
We see this strong emphasis on getting ready well in advance, and it seems like that's kind of baked into the tradition itself.
Like we're meant to ease into it.
Yeah. We learn that Moshe Rabbeinu himself, he actually set the precedent for studying the laws of Pesach for a solid 30 days before the holiday even starts.
30 days? That's quite a commitment.
It is. And the learning continues throughout the holiday itself.
Wow. So it's like a constant process of deepening our understanding.
Exactly. Now, how we understand that, the actual level of obligation, there are a few different views on that.
Right, because there's always different interpretations.
Always. The prevailing view, and you see this in major legal codes, like a Shulchan Aruch.
Oh, that's a classic.
Right. And it's further elaborated on in the Mishnah Berurah. They see this 30-day study period as like a real obligation.
We really should be taking the time to learn.
Yeah, that's the main takeaway. But then you have other respected scholars like the Ran and the Rashba.
They've got a slightly different perspective, right?
They do. They suggest it's more about prioritizing Pesach-related questions.
Yeah.
So if you're already studying Torah during those 30 days and a question about Pesach comes up, you should prioritize answering that.
That makes sense.
And then we've got this more stringent view from the Bnai Yehoshua.
He's known for his in-depth analysis.
He is. And he actually suggests that this 30-day learning period, it might even carry the weight of a biblical commandment.
Wow. So the stakes get a little higher there.
They do. But no matter what, regardless of the exact level of obligation, it's clear that getting ready for Pesach through learning, it's a central theme.
Preparation of the mind.
Yes. And then that preparation, it naturally leads to action. Specifically, all of that cleaning we do for Pesach.
The famous Pesach cleaning.
Right. Biur chametz, that's the term for it. It's all about removing leavened products from our homes.
And that ties into the 30-day period, right?
It does. The Mishnah Berurah specifically points out that within these 30 days leading up to Pesach, we got to be extra careful about not leaving chametz in those hard-to-reach spots.
Yeah, those little nooks and crannies where it can hide.
Exactly. Because if it's stuck there and you don't find it before Pesach, then it's a problem.
Makes cleaning a lot more stressful.
For sure. And here's where it gets really interesting, This cleaning during the 30 days, it's not just about being tidy. It actually fulfills a specific mitzvah.
There's a mitzvah for cleaning.
There is. It's called tashbisu, and it's directly connected to getting rid of chametz.
Huh. I never thought of it like that.
You remember the Bnai Yehoshua?
Mm-hmm.
With his stringent views.
Right, right.
He takes it even further, suggesting that this cleaning within the 30 days, it might even be elevated to the level of a Torah commandment.
So even the cleaning has this deep spiritual significance.
Absolutely. So we're not just cleaning our homes. We're also kind of cleansing ourselves in preparation for Pesach.
I like that.
And speaking of that, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the why behind all of this,
Yeah.
Like, why do we go through all these detailed practices?
It's a good question, right? Like, what's the ultimate purpose behind it all?
Exactly. And throughout all these sources, the fundamental reason given for observing mitzvot, all of them, is that it's the Retzon Hashem, the will of God.
That's the core motivation.
It is. At its simplest, that's what it comes down to.
But it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to understand the reasons behind the mitzvot.
Oh, definitely not. And this is where the Rambam comes in.
Rambam. He's got a lot to say about everything.
He does. He was this brilliant Jewish philosopher and legal scholar, and he emphasized that we shouldn't just blindly follow the commandments. We should strive to understand and appreciate the reasons behind them.
So it's not just about doing, it's about understanding why we're doing it.
Exactly. In fact, he actually saw this seeking of understanding, trying to grasp the why, as an obligation in itself.
Wow, so learning about the mitzvah becomes a mitzvah in itself.
Right. And when we look at Pesach specifically, it's actually given this special designation.
Let me guess. It's got something to do with freedom.
It does. But even more than that, it's called the Rosh Hashanah of Emunah, the New Year for Faith.
So Pesach is all about strengthening our belief.
It's at the core of the holiday. We learned that our initial liberation from Egypt, it was actually rooted in our faith, in our belief in God.
And that same faith is what's going to lead us to future redemption.
Exactly. So one of the central positive mitzvah of Pesach, it's actually the act of cultivating and strengthening this faith.
How do we do that?
Well, a big part of it is sharing the story of the Exodus, that incredible story of our liberation.
Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim.
Yes. And we're specifically commanded to do this with our children, the Torah tells us, v'yedeta levincha, which means, and you shall tell your son.
Passing it down to the next generation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, here's what I find so fascinating. The Slonimer Rebbe, he explains that this mitzvah of retelling the Exodus, it's not like other mitzvah that you perform once and you're done.
So it's not a one-time thing?
Not at all. He says it's an ongoing process. It's about constantly reminding ourselves of this story, about imbuing our hearts with that sense of faith throughout the whole year.
So we're constantly renewing that connection.
Yes. And this applies to everyone, even the greatest sages, because the depths of faith are truly infinite.
There's always more to learn and experience.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for a good way to break down Emunah, the Nesavo Shalom offers this really helpful framework.
We're listening.
He says there are three core aspects to it. First is the belief in God as the creator of everything.
That's pretty fundamental.
Right. It's like the starting point. The second aspect is belief in divine providence, which means that God is personally involved in our lives.
Yes, gotcha, Pradis.
Exactly. And the third aspect is the belief in the unique, chosen status and mission of Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people.
So it's about recognizing our special connection to God.
Yes. And what's so brilliant about the Pesach experience is that it perfectly embodies all three of these principles.
Walk me through that.
Okay, so those miraculous events of the Exodus, right? They point directly to God as the ultimate creator.
Because only someone with that kind of power could pull off something like that.
Right. Then you have the 10 plagues, which are a powerful demonstration of divine providence, God's active hand in history.
Guiding events to ultimately free the Israelites.
Yes. And then the Exodus itself, culminating in the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, that highlights Israel's unique role and covenant with God.
So it all ties together beautifully.
It does. And, we also learn about the incredible merit of the righteous women during the Exodus. Their unwavering faith played a huge part in the whole redemption.
Their emunah was truly remarkable.
It was. They continued to have children even when facing unimaginable hardship because they believed that God would ultimately redeem them.
That's powerful.
It is. And, speaking of those key mitzvah, those core commandments, alongside telling the story, we have two other main ones for Pesach.
Eating matzah and getting rid of shemetz, right?
You got it. And they're actually really connected to this whole theme of Emunah.
Okay, I'm curious. How so?
Well, let's start with shemetz. It's often understood to represent the Yetzer Hara, that inner voice that tries to lead us astray.
The one that tells us to eat all the shemetz before Pesach.
Well, maybe. But in a deeper sense, it's that inclination that can weaken our faith and our connection to God.
The things that hold us back.
Exactly. And that's why even the tiniest amount of shemetz is forbidden during Pesach, and the penalty for eating it is really severe. It kind of underscores how pervasive and damaging those negative inclinations can be.
So it's like a spiritual detox?
Yes. We're getting rid of all the stuff that's not good for us, both physically and spiritually.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
And then you have matzah, which is described in the Zohar, one of the main texts of Jewish mysticism, as mikla d'mehem nusa, the food of faith.
So it's like the opposite of shemetz.
Totally. And when you put all three mitzvahs together, the storytelling, the shemetz removal, and the matzah eating, you see how they all point to Emunah as the central theme of Pesach.
It paints a really clear picture.
Right. It's all about strengthening our belief and connecting with God in a deeper way.
Now, shifting gears a bit, can we talk about the month of Nisan itself? What's so special about it?
Oh, great question. So Nisan is actually considered a really special month in the Jewish calendar. It's like a month of anticipation and preparation.
Anticipation for what?
For Pesach, of course. But also for the arrival of Mashiach, the Messiah.
So there's a messianic element to it as well.
There is. It's a time when we're reminded of our ultimate redemption and the hope for a better future.
And that hope is reflected in the way we observe the month, right?
Exactly. For instance, we have certain restrictions during Nisan. We don't fast, even on the anniversary of a death.
And not even for a yard site.
Nope. We also omit certain penitential prayers, like tikkaning. Eulogies are not given publicly, and even the Kaddish prayer is recited in an abbreviated form.
Wow. So it's a month of like heightened holiness and joy.
It is. And that's because of the inherent holiness of the month and the anticipation of redemption.
And within this month of Nisan, there's also this really important communal responsibility.
Oh, you're talking about making sure everyone has access to matzah for Pesach.
Exactly. This is where the concept of Maus Chittim or Kimcha de Pisha comes in. It's all about providing funds or flour so that everyone can have matzah for the holiday.
And our sources really emphasize the importance of this. Like, they say neglecting this obligation is as bad as spilling blood.
Wow, that's serious.
It is. And the Rima, a key Ashkenazi legal authority, he actually added the custom of distributing actual flour to those in need. This makes it easier for them to bake or obtain matzah, you know.
So it's not just about giving money, it's about making sure people actually have the matzah.
Exactly. And we're also taught that we should prioritize helping our poor relatives first.
Yeah.
You know, there's this beautiful connection between providing for others and helping them strengthen their own faith and observance.
It's like we're all responsible for each other.
Yes. And then there's this other beautiful custom, maybe a little less known, of reciting a special blessing on fruit trees during Nisan.
A blessing on fruit trees.
Yeah. It's a way of expressing our gratitude for God's creation and the renewal of nature. And what's really cool is that this blessing can even be recited on Shabbat or Yom Tov.
So it's not restricted like some other blessings.
Nope. And women are also encouraged to participate. Ideally, you'd recite it with others, you know, and ideally in front of 2 different fruit-bearing trees.
Sounds like a lovely tradition.
It is. Though those aren't strict requirements.
Got it.
And now, let's talk about eating matzah as we approach Pesach.
Ah, the pre-Pesach matzah dilemma.
Right. There's some interesting and kind of varying customs here. So the generally accepted practice is to avoid eating any kosher LePesach matzah from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is the first day of the Hebrew month of Nisan.
So that's like a month before Pesach starts.
Yeah. Some people even go a step further and avoid all matzah, even regular matzah, for the whole 30-day period before Pesach.
Wow, that's dedication.
It is. But one thing that's universal, a hard and fast rule,
Yeah.
is that you can't eat any matzah whatsoever on Erev Pesach, the day right before the holiday starts.
That one I know.
And then there's Shabbos Hagadol.
The Great Sabbath. What's that all about?
It's the Shabbat right before Pesach. And on this Shabbat, there's this widespread custom to attend a shur, which is like a Torah class or lecture.
To brush up on the laws of Pesach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about reviewing the laws and customs so everyone's ready for the holiday.
Smart. I always forget something.
And the name Shabbos Hagadol, the Great Sabbath, it actually commemorates this miracle that happened in Egypt. So the Jews, they publicly prepared the Paschal lamb, you know, right before leaving Egypt.
Right.
And the Egyptians, they had wanted to stop him, but they remained silent. They didn't interfere.
Wow, that's a powerful story.
It is, and it kind of highlights this theme of divine intervention, you know, God silencing the Egyptians to protect the Israelites.
And on a more, I guess, practical level, but still very important, there's this really important idea that comes up in the Gemara.
Oh, about helping our parents with the Pesach cleaning?
Exactly. It says that just like we have this obligation to help someone carrying a heavy load,
Right.
we also have a moral responsibility to help our parents with all that work that goes into getting ready for Pesach.
Which can be a lot.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider all the details we've been discussing.
So let's get into some of those details, shall we? Starting with Bedikat Chametz, the search for chametz.
Okay, let's do it. This is where things start to get real.
They do. So the sources are very clear on this. Bedikat Chametz has to happen on the night of the 14th of Nisan, which is the night before the first Seder.
Right.
And it should happen right after Mariv, the evening prayer.
No delaying tactics.
None. In fact, it's considered so important that it takes precedence even over work.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is. And, you know, the scope of this search, it's meant to be pretty thorough.
We're talking every nook and cranny, right?
We are. Literally, it says Koram Yusdekim, which means all the holes and cracks.
And of course, there's a deeper meaning to this as well, right?
Always. It's not just about finding crumbs. It's also a metaphor for searching for the Yetzer Hara within ourselves.
Looking for those hidden negative inclinations.
Exactly. Not just in those obvious places, but in those deeper, more hidden corners of our being.
And just like with the physical cleaning, we're doing a spiritual cleaning as well.
Beautifully put. Now, of course, there are practical limits to this whole searching process. We're not expected to do anything dangerous.
Right, safety first.
Always. For instance, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, a very prominent 20th century rabbi, he ruled that we don't have to search in areas that are considered maypoles, which means dangerous wreckage or unstable structures.
So no need to risk life and limb for a crumb of bread.
Exactly. And we're also not obligated to move super heavy items that could cause injury.
Makes sense.
Now, here's something interesting. Strictly speaking, from a legal perspective, searching for tiny crumbs, like perurim, isn't actually a binding obligation.
Wait, really?
Yeah, but there's this very strong and widespread custom to be super meticulous, to get rid of even the smallest traces of shamet.
So this is like going above and beyond.
It is. And it's driven by this idea of like maintaining the holiness of our homes during Pesach.
Creating a pure space for the holiday.
Exactly. And the same principle applies to outdoor areas like yards.
So we don't have to go crazy searching the backyard.
Well, the lenient view is that birds will probably eat any shemets out there.
Makes sense. They love breadcrumbs.
Right. But if it's the morning of the 14th of Nisan and there's still visible shemets, then we should remove it.
Okay, so there's a line.
There is. And what about people who live in apartments or shared spaces? What about common areas like laundry rooms or stairwells?
That's a good question. Does everyone have to search those areas?
They do. It's actually the responsibility of all the tenants to make sure those areas are properly searched.
So some coordination is needed.
Definitely. They need to work together to make sure it's a thorough and fair search.
Fair? What do you mean by that?
Well, like, no one person should be stuck doing all the work,
Right.
And we can't forget about cars.
Oh, yeah. Chemetz loves to hide in cars.
It doesn't. Cars definitely need to be diligently cleaned and searched.
No exceptions there.
None. Now, there is a bit of discussion among the poskim, the legal authorities, about whether you need a separate inspection of your car on the night of the 14th if you've already cleaned it earlier.
So, do you have to do the whole search with a blessing again?
Right, that's the question. Some say yes, some say no. But the safest and most widely accepted approach is to at least have your car in mind when you're reciting the blessing at home before the search.
So you're covering all your bases.
Exactly. And what about offices? What if someone's not going to be in their office during Pesach at all?
Good question. Does that change anything?
It does. In that case, their office should ideally be included in the sale of chametz.
That makes sense. So it's technically not your problem anymore.
Right. But if someone's planning on going to their office during Chol Hamod, the intermediate days of the festival,
right,
then they need to do a thorough search on the night of the 14th, or even on the 13th, if that's more practical.
So it really depends on your individual circumstances.
It does. Now, what about those really tricky areas to clean, like tight crevices or appliances with hard-to-reach spots?
Yeah, those are always a challenge.
Right. Well, Rav Scheinberg, he had a very practical solution for this.
Yeah.
He said, you can use ammonia to render any remaining food inedible.
Even for animals?
Even for animals.
Yeah.
That way, you're fulfilling the requirement of removing chametz, even if you can't physically get to every single crumb.
That's a good tip.
And speaking of practicalities, what about students living in dormitories? What's their obligation?
Yeah, they can't exactly clean out the whole dorm.
Right, so they are obligated to search their own rooms on the night of the 14th.
Okay, that makes sense.
But, dorm life can be hectic, so they are allowed to appoint someone else to do the search for them.
Like a designated chametz searcher?
Or they can do it themselves before they leave for the holiday.
Got it, so there's some flexibility there.
There is. Now, getting into the actual procedure of the Bidika, the ideal way to do it is for the homeowner, or the head of the household, to personally conduct the search.
So they're taking the lead.
They are. And they should recite the blessing out loud so that anyone helping them can also fulfill the mitzvah.
Because you need a blessing for this, right?
You do. And during the blessing, the intention should be to fulfill the Torah obligation of destroying any shemetz that's found.
Which we'll do later.
Right. But the mitzvah itself, it actually continues until the next day when the shemetz is destroyed.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way.
And one more thing about the search. There should be no unnecessary talking between the blessing and the start of the search.
Focus on the task at hand.
Yes. And even during the search itself, conversation should be kept to a minimum and ideally related to the search.
No time for idle chatter.
Exactly. Now, then we have this fun little custom of hiding 10 pieces of shemetz before the search.
Ah, yes. To make things more interesting.
Right. It's a way of like ensuring that we'll actually find something during the search.
And to make sure we're being thorough.
Exactly. These pieces should be very small, less than a kazais, which is about the size of an olive, and they should be wrapped in something like plastic wrap.
So they're easy to spot and clean up?
Yes. And it's a good idea to write down where you hid them. Yeah. Just in case.
Wouldn't want to lose those precious crumbs.
Now, immediately after the search, and then again in the morning before we burn the chametz, we recite something called the Kol Chemira.
What's that?
It's a declaration that any chametz we might have missed, we're nullifying it. We're saying it's ownerless and has no value.
So we're covering all our bases.
We are. And it's really important to understand the Kol Chemira in your own language, not just recite it by rote.
The meaning is key.
Yes. And if you forget to say it at night, you can still say it in the morning before you burn the chametz.
Okay, good to know. Now, what about the actual prohibitions against chametz? Like, what exactly are we forbidden from doing?
Great question. So there are actually 5 distinct negative commandments related to chametz during Pesach.
5? Wow.
Yeah. Each one comes from its own verse in the Torah.
Lay them on me.
Okay, so the first one is the prohibition against eating chametz from a certain time on the 14th of Nisan, which is like midday. The second one is the prohibition against eating chametz throughout the entire holiday.
That's the big one.
Right. The third one is the prohibition against eating anything that contains even a trace of chametz.
So no sneaky chametz hiding in our food.
Exactly. The fourth one is a little different. It's the prohibition against seeing your own chametz in your possession during Pesach. That's called ba'yira.
So even seeing it is a problem.
It is. And the fifth one is similar. It's the prohibition against finding your own chametz in your possession during Pesach. That's called bal yamatza.
Interesting. So it's not just about eating it.
No, it's about this whole idea of separation, We're supposed to completely distance ourselves from chametz during Pesach.
Physically and spiritually.
Exactly. And just like we were talking about before, these prohibitions can also be seen as a metaphor, They represent those things in our lives that can undermine our imuna, those negative thoughts, beliefs, or behaviors that we should try to get rid of.
So like getting rid of the chametz in our hearts as well.
Yes. It's all about that inner cleansing and purification.
No, how exactly are we supposed to get rid of chametz?
Well, the Torah gives us 2 main ways. Nullification, which is called bitul chametz, and physical destruction, which is called biur chametz.
And we do both, right?
We do. The rabbis instituted both methods. So bitul chametz is basically declaring that any chametz we own but haven't found, we're making it ownerless. We're saying it has no value to us.
So we're mentally detaching ourselves from it.
Exactly. And then biur chametz is the actual physical act of searching for and destroying the chametz, usually by burning it.
Makes sense. So we're taking concrete steps to get rid of it, both physically and mentally.
Right. And then we have this whole practice of selling our chametz to a non-Jew.
Ah, yes. The famous chametz sale.
Right. This custom has developed over centuries, and it uses these different legal transactions, because there were disagreements among the poskim about what actually constitutes a valid sale in this context.
So there was some debate about how to do it properly.
There was. And some people, they raise questions about how effective it actually is, because the chametz is often still physically in our homes, even though we've technically sold it.
It's more like we're renting out the space where it's stored.
Right. So because of those considerations, the prevalent custom nowadays is to only sell items that are not specifically certified as kosher for Passover, unless selling the actual kosher for Passover chametz would result in a big financial loss.
So it's about being practical as well.
Exactly. Now let's talk about kashering.
Ah, yes. The art of making things kosher for Pesach.
Right. So this is all about preparing our kitchens, our dishes, our utensils, everything we're going to use during Pesach to make sure they're free of any chametz residue.
It's a big job.
It is. But the good news is you don't need special tablecloths or hand towels.
Just regular ones that are washed.
Exactly. Washing them thoroughly is generally enough. Some families do have a specific custom of using special bibs for kids, though.
To keep their clothes clean.
Right. And high chairs? Those need a little extra attention. You want to clean them well, then give them a rinse with something strong like bleach or ammonia, and then cover them up and set them aside until Pesach is over.
Okay, what about ovens? Those are trickier.
They are. Rav Aaron Kotler, he suggested cleaning the oven with a strong oven cleaner and then heating it to its highest setting for 2 hours.
2 hours?
Yeah. Though he made an exception for broiler trays, those sometimes need a different approach.
Makes sense. Now, I know Rav Moshe Feinstein was known for his stricter rulings. What did he say about oven?
He held a stricter view, yeah. He said you need to do libun gemur, which means heating the oven to a red-hot state using a blowtorch or hot coals.
Wow, that's intense.
It is, but in that case, you don't need the usual 24-hour waiting period before capturing.
So it's quicker, but more intense.
Exactly. And what about oven knobs?
Those are always a pain.
They are. Ideally, you cover them with foil or replace them with knobs that you only use for Pesach. If not, you got to clean them really well and then soak them or spray them with ammonia or bleach.
Okay, that makes sense. What about those self-cleaning ovens? Are those okay for Pesach?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
But it's best to run a full self-cleaning cycle beforehand to get rid of any potential smoke or residue.
And what about the racks in electric ovens?
Some opinions say you should leave those in during the self-cleaning cycle for an extra 15 minutes.
Just to be sure.
Exactly. Oh, and before we move on, a quick word about baking matzah.
Okay, what's special about that?
It's a whole intricate process.
Yeah.
It requires meticulous cleaning of all the equipment, and it all has to be done within an 18-minute time frame to prevent any leavening.
Wow, 18 minutes. That's a tight window.
It is.